guys, Natty Geek 78 here, and we are back in our series for MLA That. Once again, just to recap, MLA That is for anyone who hates writing essays. And we're on to part 3 of MLA That, which is MLA How, where we look at the how that we frame our quotes that we use in our essays, how we properly use in-text citation, and then lastly, how we explain the quotes that we are using to back up the claims that we are making in our essays. So let's get started. So there's a really great acronym that I came up with to help you remember this MLA how. It's called FCE. F stands for frame it, the C stands for cite it, and the E stands for explain it. Remember this acronym to help you and guide you in properly, effectively including quotes, aka citations, in your essays. So let's define the FCE within FCE. The F stands for frame. Frame is a phrase or a clause a writer uses to set up or frame the cited quote. You never just want to throw a quote out at a reader. You always want to frame it or introduce the quote. That's what frame is. The next part of this FCE is cite. Cite is just simply where you cite a quote from a writer that is repeated by someone other than the original author that you provide location info for a reader, i.e. the in-text citation. And the E within FCE is explain. Explain is where you have a group of sentences, no more than 2, maybe 3, that a writer uses to explain and elaborate on how the cited quote supports the writer's points and thesis statements. FCE. So before we get to the F, let's talk about the C, cited. And I got a quick little quiz for you. So let's check your cited knowledge. 1, based on what you have learned and done regarding citing sources, identify which statement is false. I'll give you a second. If you said B, you are awesome sauce. Great job. So we know the page number should be included for all citations types when completing an in-text citation. That is false. Depending on the type of source, you cannot include a page number. Let's go to number 2. Go ahead and look at number 2 and then give me an answer. If you said D, you are rocking it when it comes to cited knowledge. Now that you got the basics of in-text citation, let's talk about some cited reminders. So here are some citation do's and don'ts. You do want to cite anything that comes from any external source. We don't want any plagiarism accusations. You do want to end the citation with proper in-text citation. So when you get done using your direct quote, you want to make sure you have that proper in-text citation in those parentheses. You do want to explain the citation significance. You never just want to give a quote and then not explain what it supports, proves, demonstrates, implies, whatever. Some citation don'ts. Don't use a citation in your thesis statement. Your thesis statement is literally from your brain, so it should not have an external source. Don't let a citation stand alone. That's why you frame it and then you explain its significance. Don't use a citation to start a body paragraph. And lastly, don't start a sentence with a citation. Those are just some quick citation do's and don'ts. Why are your citation and your sources and your quotes important? Because they help you build your ethos as a scholar and a writer. And the last thing I'll say is a hot tip. Your citation should always have a purpose. Pick your quotes with intentionality. Don't just pick a quote just to say, oh, I have a quote. Every quote that you have in your paper should have a purpose and intention. And that is, the goal is to support your thesis statement and to convert your reader to your thinking. So let's talk about some citation reminders. Remember, there's no period immediately after the quote. I know naturally in our writing, we want to put a period after the word internet. However, when we are using a direct quote, we never put the period immediately after the quote. Instead, the period is placed at the end of the page citation after the parentheses. So don't forget that. Now here's some breaking news for you. So what if the quote I want to use ends in a question mark or an exclamation point? Well, guess what? You can include those ending marks like a question mark or an exclamation point within the quote, but you still have to use the period after that last parenthesis. So it looks kind of like this. So what just happened? Who'd have thought a woman with 2 small children could run so fast? That's a quote I want to use in my essay. It ends in a question mark. So I put the question mark in there. I close my quote. I have my parentheses. I have my in-text citation. And then I put my period at the end. So for clarity, I keep the question mark, but I also include that period at the end to completely close out my citation. So now that we got the cited out the way, let's talk about the big part of FCE, which is the frame it. And I have the frame it 5. Any one of these 5 options you can use to set up or introduce your quote. And I go from simple all the way to difficult. So we have the introductory element, the complete sentence, the explanatory phrase, the partial paraphrase, and then the full paraphrase. So let's get cracking. So let's talk about the introductory element. So what you do is you're going to introduce your citation with an introductory word or phrase. And I give you some right here, but on your MLA How guided notes, I give you a whole litany of transition words and phrases you can use as introductory elements. Now, you do have to worry about punctuation with this frame it option. You have to place a comma after the introductory element. So let's see it in action. So for instance, Noah declares, my mother, blank, 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 as she is religious once her mind's made up, that's it. Bam, so I have my, for instance, Noah declares. That's my introductory element. And then on good measure, I included a transition phrase. For instance, Noah declares. I have my comma. You know, that's one of our grammar rules. After an introductory element, we always have to have a comma. And then I have my quote. So I framed it. And then I have my quote, and then I have my in-text citation. So transition phrase, comma, and then my quote, parentheses, period at the end, bam. Pretty simple. Now let's go to an easy one. This is the complete sentence. Very similar to the introductory element, except this time it's a complete sentence and not a element or a phrase. So what you do is you introduce your citation using a complete sentence that sets up the quote used. The only difference with punctuation is instead of a comma, you're going to place a colon after the complete sentence. So let's look at the example. Author Trevor Noah recounts one evening on a minibus when describing his mother's complex personality. Bam. That is a complete sentence. It could stand alone by itself. I am setting up my quote for the reader. Let's see it in action. So right here, as you can see, I have my complete sentence, and then bam, I have my colon, then bam, I got my quote, then bam, I have my in-text citation in my parentheses, and then bam, I got my period. Now, you may be wondering why I do not have the author's last name enclosed in the parentheses. Well, quite simply, because I said the author's name in my complete sentence to set up my quote, I do not need the author's last name in the parentheses. I just need the page number. So that's a little MLA trick right there. All right, so now we're getting into the moderate, the explanatory phrase. Explanatory means you're going to explain the quote, but the only difference between that and the complete sentence is that it's just a phrase, means it cannot stand alone. So what you do is begin your sentence with a phrase that introduces your quote, then ends with your closed off citation. And of course, because it is a dependent clause or a phrase, you have to have a comma after that phrase. So let's look at our quote. The animosity I felt from the colored people I encountered growing up was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. So I want to have an explanatory phrase that sets up a portion of that quote I want to use. Here's mine. In chapter 9, The Mulberry Tree, Noah vividly describes the animosity I felt from the colored people. And as you can see, so I have my phrase that explains or basically introduces the quote, and then bam, I pop in my quote. So I have my explanatory phrase, and then bam, I have my comma after my phrase, and then I have my quote, bam, in-text citation with the page number, bam, period. Explanatory phrase. Very simple, very easy. Of course, I could say in chapter 9, the mulberry tree, the author vividly describes then I, of course, would have to have Noah 75 within my parentheses for my in-text citation. Moving on to frame it option number 4. This one's hard. It's the partial paraphrase. So the partial paraphrase, what we do here is we're going to paraphrase a portion of the citation followed by a short quote of only a few words. So of course, if you don't know what a paraphrase is where you take a section of a text and you pretty much put it into your own words without taking away the meaning or the spirit of what the author intended. So let's look at this line from Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. I was 9 years old when my mother threw me out of a moving car. Ooh. So we want to paraphrase a portion of that. So let's see it in action. At the age of 9, author Trevor Noah recalls a time his mother. So notice I still have the spirit of the direct quote. I just now put it into my own words. I was 9 years old. At the age of 9, author Trevor Noah recalls a time his mother. Bam. And then I have my quote, threw me out of a moving car. So then I have my short quote of only a few words. Now, here's the great part about the partial paraphrase. If you want, this is how some of you can, you have those long quotes that you want to use, but it's really long, so it takes like 2 or 3 lines in your essays, and you don't want to block quote it. So this is how the partial paraphrase is perfect for those long quotes, because you could paraphrase some of the quote you want to use, but then use the short quotations for what you really want to include from the quote. So those of you that have those long quotes, the partial paraphrase is perfect for that. So let's see it closer in action. So at the age of 9, author Trevor Noah recalls how his mother, and notice there is no punctuation there. It's just a complete sentence all the way through. So there's no punctuation here. I know you probably want to, so resist the urge to add a comma after the phrase before the quote. That doesn't go there. So we're going to set the short citation apart with quotation marks. And that's pretty much it. And then, of course, you want to have the proper in-text citation. Of course, since I mentioned the author's name, I do not have to include it in my in-text citation. So I just have the page number because it is a book. And lastly, frame it option number 5, the full paraphrase. So you're going to provide a full paraphrase in your words of the quote or the citation you want to use. So what you do, you want to write the quotation in your own words. The passage must be attributed to the original source. So whatever you paraphrase, you must still keep the spirit of the quote. You still have to include basically the spirit of what the quote intended. You do not want to reinvent or rewrite it. You almost want to pay homage to the quote. When you do this, once again, when you need a large section of quoted text, but you want to limit the amount and space and direction of your writing. So once again, this is for those long quotes that you just feel you have to have, but it's just too long to include in an essay. Paraphrasing it can be your next best thing, where you can trim it down to maybe 1 to 2 sentences that literally only take maybe a line or a line and a half of your essay. So here's our quote. As you can see, it's really long. This would be way too long to put in an essay. So we have our full quote, and then bam, I have here. So I paraphrase it. So go ahead and take a look at the original quote and then look at the paraphrase option. So it took 2 sentences, but ultimately I was able to get the spirit of the quote. And then, of course, I don't have any direct quotes because it's a paraphrase, but I still have to give honor and credit to the author, Trevor Noah, by having the in-text citation. So notice I have that right there. So make sure you don't forget the in-text citation. Sometimes it's easy to forget that in-text citation when we're paraphrasing, but you have to have it, especially if you're going to put that source on your Works Cited page. If it's on your Works Cited page, it definitely should be within your text. And that's all of the frame it. So that leaves us to the explain it. And the explain it is actually pretty easy. So there's 4 steps to explaining. After you frame and then cite your quote, you still have to explain it. You never just want to leave a quote hanging. So your quote explanation can be done in 2, no more than 3 sentences. And I typically do by the rule of explain sentence 1 and 2. So your first explain sentence provides analysis that connects and supports the quote to your main points in your thesis statement. And then explain sentence 2 explains why your quote is important and relevant. Now, typically you can start your explain sentence by saying this proves, this illustrates, this shows, this highlights the difference between. You can use any number of things, but you must explain how the quote supports your points. And you do that in about 2 to 3 sentences. Don't really have examples for that because that's pretty much you just explaining the purpose of your quote. If you can do a sentence starter with this proves and then answer that, you are golden. And that, guys, is it for MLA That Part 3. I hope you had fun. I hope you are rocking that FCE on your next writing assignment. This is Natty Geek 78 signing off. Remember to like, share, and subscribe this video. And remember, I'm just an English teacher out here trying to make English lovable for the world. Have a good one. Peace.